Hello, welcome back. So today we're talking to you about independent centers or stations. And the big idea is these are situations that are intact projects, if you will, for your child that they can work independently. And this has a lot of advantages. It has the advantage, obviously, that the parent can be doing something else, whether you work part-time or you work full-time and you need chunks of time that are uninterrupted. Whether, like a lot of homeschoolers, you're trying to school more than one group of children at the same time, and you prefer not to have your child just watching TV all the time or independent playing, and you want some structure. And they can also be used to really make the most of review and higher level thinking, creative projects, art, open-ended things. They can also be used just for task-specific information. So we'll go into all of this more as it goes on. And again, centers, stations, projects, whatever you prefer to call them. But I wanted to start out by saying that there are so many ways that you can do this. There's so many ways. And so in no way do I want to project the idea that this is the only way. I'm trying to show you lots of pictures, lots of ideas that will sort of trigger something for you. This isn't meant to in any way make a value judgment on what's better or what's worse. A lot of centers, of course, also depends on how much money your family has to allocate for these kind of extras. And so I just wanted to first go through how you can get things for centers. So the obvious kind of thing is they're going to buy it, right? Either through the money you have for your homeschool budget or birthdays and Christmas, or times that lots of homeschoolers get things that are going to be incorporated into later centers. But the other thing that I did a lot when my kids were young, my first set of children, is got together with the people that I was closest with that were doing the small group homeschooling families that we worked with for so many years and grew together with, and just plan ahead. Like, I'm going to get this, 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 and then can you get this, 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 this? And if you divide it between 4 or 5 families, and then you trade back and forth or you rotate, you can really cut down the cost of what you've done. The other thing that I made a lot of use of is going to museums, science centers, the zoo. The John Ball Zoo in Michigan had great chests, and they have chests that they'll sometimes let you have for free for a week or a month. Sometimes they want a small payment, and these are traveling teacher chests that schools can, get as well, but as homeschoolers you can too. And so that kind of stuff is gold. Whether I remember particularly from the zoo one on birds, where it had all different bird feathers. They had really great books that came with it. They had the different sort of mummified, preserved feet of birds. Another time when we were studying ocean life, they had just amazing hands-on things showing the stages of growth of jellyfish. But anyway, the thing is that these things are free or almost free. If you go to your science center, they might have it. And even if they won't lend out the physical objects, they'll often have some kind of at-home computer-based situation that still has a piece or two that is very hands-on. History museums, like, there's just unlimited number of situations like this where if you call them, or sometimes it's obvious on their website, you can take those items home and make them into a center. The last thing is stuff that you just have at home. It might not be obvious to you, but there are things just lying around your house waiting to become centers. So one obvious thing is the toys your children have. So one of the favorite centers of my children was creative play centers, where it was an agreed upon, this table, you can set up a village and then you're going to write a story about it later. Oh my goodness, we did that over and over again. My kids loved that. And sort of along the same vein, and I've got slides and I'll talk more about it, was set up your own museum. And so that's a situation where, using some basic things like paper and clay, and then whatever they have, they make their own museum. So this is like just what you have can become a very open-ended center. And then after they made the museum, of course, it's probably obvious to you that you ask them to make one section a day, and that's going to involve writing, because every museum is going to have some writing that you have to do. It can involve math. If you ask them as part of their center to figure out, like, how many people a year will their museum need to have come and pay X amount of money so that they can make it. You can have your family come in and pretend to buy with fake money their tickets to go to the museum. Like, there's all of these things can be done to make it more interesting. The other thing is just what's outside or what you have. There's endless centers with pennies, rocks, paper that you cut up and use as manipulatives. You can make a pie out of paper or a real one and use fractions. There's so many things. I don't have a picture of it, but one thing that was endlessly interesting to my kids was boxes of things that they could pretend to be baking with. So it could be a box of noodles before they're cooked. It could be beans. And then they're going to use their measuring cups and figure out, just play around with how many fourths equal a whole. Does that really work? There's a lot of stuff that you have that can just become a center and you don't even have to pay any money for. So there's lots of different ways to do this, but we're going to enter into the way that we did it, but just keep in mind that there's lots of other options here, and many things can be completely free. So even though a lot of these pictures show free things, some of these pictures show things that you did purchase. But again, keep in mind, you can spread that out between your friends. So here we go, and we're talking about independent centers or stations. My older children really preferred the term stations, and my younger kids, centers. It's all the same basic idea. So the thing again about centers is that you're in my situation, you may feel differently, but part of my philosophy was that idea of a joyful homeschool. Part of my philosophy was always, I want you to have these experiences as much as possible where you are thinking, where you are problem solving. So I was often looking for centers that were asking kids to think more deeply. That isn't the only way to make a center, but this is an idea where you can see that my son, who at the time is almost 4, he's a newly adopted, it's just jars filled with different amounts of water and food coloring. And this was a center that lasted for months. They loved this center. And of course, it can vary hugely by how much water you put in each jar. And then they hit it and it makes different sounds. So this is a center where I don't think I gave them very much information at all. I don't think I even started out telling them too much about the different sounds. But by varying the amounts of water and doing this over a period of weeks with these different jars, you can figure out yourself that for a young child, you're going to start to make some big conclusions about sound and volume. And, obviously the sound changes depending on how much water you have in. And then, so the next step of the station is they get to put the water in themselves. They get to start to make a plant, and it can even go farther where you would ask them to try to make a particular note. But this is an idea of something that they don't need you there, right? This is one of the things that they can be doing and thinking this on their own while you have something else that you're working on at the time. So there's different ways that you can think about how you're going to organize your centers. So that last picture, you can see it takes up a whole big table, right? And this is sort of off topic, but when we first adopted my 2 younger boys, we found that the best way to homeschool was outside. So we actually moved tables outside, and their centers were outside where we could, they could explore the world, which was so exciting to them after the orphanage. But on our deck, the older kids could get their work done. But often, your centers are inside, and you think about how you're going to organize them. So this is another center where this particular center, the blue is 1,000, then there's 100, and there's tens, and there's ones, and even a really young child can start to be asked to make numbers, like how would this number look? How many tens would it have? How many ones would it have? And again, this is using a table, but you can organize your centers in different ways. So for a young child, having the center sitting out on a table might work the best, but pretty soon, children usually start to be able to figure out how to have trays that they can pull off and put back together, or boxes, or bowls, a variety of different things where they're all together, and your child knows where they are, and they knows that that's the area that they can take off the center and start to work with it. So centers can be really simple, or they can be much more complex. So here's just a really basic center. It's just using pennies. It's asking a child to skip count by fives. So they're just laying out those pennies, and then of course skip counting leads to multiplication, but they're just counting that and kind of seeing how that lays out. There's another super simple center. It's a book of Children of the World. It just has like one page about, this is what the life of a child in a certain country would be, and then they've got a map. So you might that center might just say, look at people who live in South America, and so it could be just very, very simple. A center could be quite a bit more complex. So these are some centers for some older children. So one of them is fossils, and it's asking children to group them into periods of time. And another one is about art masterpieces. So this has a pretty complicated puzzle, and then it has a book that goes with it where they can read about the masterpiece. Also, you could use paint. But these are centers that work with what is being studied at that particular time. So most centers are going to be more enriching to your child if you can sort of be echoing either a review topic or what you're studying at the time, unless it's just a really open-ended thing where you're just asking for them to work completely on their thinking skills. If you throw in a center on magnetism and you haven't talked about magnetism, it's going to be really different than if your child has already learned some basic ideas about that. So another thing to think about when you're setting up these centers is where are you at the time these are happening? Because even though you ideally want it to be that you are free to do whatever it seems that you set up the centers for, you still probably want to stay close enough to just make sure that the child is staying, on task. So again, if it's very open-ended, this is a center where my son was asked to make a building structure that would still stick together electronically, but it would be on 3 levels. So, it was pretty open-ended, but it still tells him how to do this. But he's thinking about it, so he doesn't really need specific instructions. Here's another center with my daughters where they're spread out and they are just asked to make a certain number of letters, the letters that they're studying that week with clay. Okay, so that doesn't take nearly as much in the way of instruction. It doesn't necessarily need something to keep them focused. But other times you're going to find that it does really help to have some modeling. So here's a center that we did a number of times where it's just old boxes, paper rolls, aluminum foil, and they can kind of make what they want. But this is elevated by the fact that they had a book that would give some ideas. So it's open to the robot page. And having just some kind of model can really help a child to go a little farther. Another center that my kids love to do was write a letter. Now, it's really crucial that for that center to work with a young child that there's a model in there. Because again, the idea is that the center is going to allow your child to have some independent time, you probably don't want it where your child has to keep coming to ask you, oh, well, I need a stamp. And how do you spell the state you live in? And where do you put the comma again? So just having a letter that you wrote out, the address of, okay, this is where your return address goes. This is the address of where it's being sent. Like, that's the first step of modeling. This is where a stamp would go. Independently, then they can just look at that. They know what they're doing. They pick the card they want. Oh yeah, stamp goes here. Oh yeah, I'm going to write it here. Okay. And then of course, eventually they probably don't need that. But the trick is that you make it that the center really can stand alone, and the child doesn't have to keep coming back to you to say, well, what should I make with the junk drawer today? Or, what was that thing? You want it to be independent. And so, like, for example, if it was painting on the same level, you would want to, in the box or the tray, whatever it is that you're using, you would really want to think through what does my child need, based on their age. So if it's a younger child, then I would put in water in a jar with a lid, so that partway through me trying to teach whatever, 4th grade math, I don't have this adorable child saying, oh, can you fill this water up for me? Or, oh, I spilled the water out of the sink. Where's a paintbrush? To make this work, in that box, there's a paintbrush, there's the water ready to go, and there's, like in a little baggie, there's a washcloth that's wet, so that that child has all the things that they need. And this is so great for independence and learning how things work too, because they can look at that and they think to themselves, oh, what comes first? I'm going to take out the water. I'm going to open the jar. Oh, I'm done now. So I'm going to clean my hands with this washcloth, and then I'm going to put it back in. And of course, depending on your house or how your children are, maybe it's great for your child to go do that by yourself. And just to think through how it can stay really an independent situation. You can think of centers based on skills that you want to do too. So for example, if you're trying to get something task specific, these are some examples of very inexpensive centers, but you can see that there's still cards there for the child to flip through. So they're going to think to themselves about, oh, I'm supposed to do this division problem. And then in the cup, I put the remainder. So even though they might understand division, for example, doing it enough times with their hands to really understand the idea of the remainder cup is a really nice way to visualize that and really understand that idea. Here you have different envelopes to start off with and figure out multiplication. Are you going to do 4 groups of 3, 3 groups of 4? Does it turn out the same? Or just to sort of do it to cement skills. It can be done that way too. My oldest daughter, who was a very visual person and who really loved things to be beautiful, we, for example, went to garage sales in different places, and we bought so many different button cards. And she learned all her multiplication. Finally, she was super motivated by those button cards. So we had, 10, or I think we went to 12 button cards with just 1 on each button. And you can use that, and then you can have 12 button cards with 2 on each button, and you can see how that's endlessly can be used, even if your child is just going through some flashcards at the same time that they're arranging their different buttons. So there's all kinds of different ways to make this happen for your child and for you. So there's also going to be centers that are more complicated. And so here's some magnets, and here's a science project that requires quite a few different things. These kind of centers might be quite a bit better if you have, really specific questions for your child, even if they're open-ended questions, even if they're questions like, can you find 4 different ways to build an electrical circuit with what you've got here, and draw them out, with the line for open or close or whatever. If you're doing magnets, there's like different levels this magnets could be. It could be something just like, oh, play with magnets. But if you just have a couple questions in there, it's sort of like, well, how many pieces of paper can you put between these 2 magnets and then it still work? Or which items are not magnetic. If you have some actual questions to lead the child, it may be a much different experience for them. Having a box of things you could do science out of is probably, interesting on some level, but it's more interesting if you're asking them to complete a specific situation. And sometimes you want to also have a book in there, or it might have something just really basic that they're going to read to kind of help them through what is going to happen. So these independent centers can be organized in a different way. So you can see in this one picture, it's actually an accidental picture that I finally found a picture of this, that there's trays. And of course, if you're a strict Montessori person, and I love a lot of the ideas behind Montessori, these trays are really great. And a child at a glance can see, oh, this is what is happening. And it can be very beautiful. But some of the kids just couldn't, it was just a lot of things went wrong with carrying those trays or getting one thing knocked over or the other. So we ended up for most of the time using boxes. And these boxes, are much easier to move from one place to the other. And as a piece of that, you could even also use wide bowls. When you're thinking about your centers, it's really true that some centers are going to last for a really long time, and some are going to be just happening for a little while. And it's okay to have centers just for a particular child. So in this accidental picture where you can see my dog's ear, you'll see that there's a big brown case there. So since I had 5 children that were trying to learn English, I invested in a tape recorder and tapes that were sounds of people talking and working on certain sounds in English. And they had these cars that were kind of magnetic, or no, I like sort of like mirrored. So as you moved them, it would show your mouth going to 3 different positions. Well, my children who spoke, my 4 biological children didn't need that at all. But some of my younger kids who were adopted did that center for years and they loved it, but some of them didn't. So it's really okay to think about having a center for a particular need or a particular time. It's going to work. Renee, do you want to talk at all about centers and what you thoughts that you might have at this time?
Yes, thanks, Helen. Centers in our home, we did a lot of similar things to what you were doing with centers. And I again reemphasize that with centers, there'll be certain centers and supplies and materials that you're really going to want to invest in, because you can use them for multiple children over multiple ages for more long-term use over several years. And other materials, they're going to be things, like Helen said, you're going to find around your house. And you may come up with an idea for a center. Maybe you've done some research online and you've seen a center, and you say to yourself, how am I going to get those materials? I don't have a lab here. I don't have all of these fancy materials. But if you really think about how you could recreate a similar center at home, a similar project that your child could work on for independent center or study time, once you start thinking about how you could recreate it, you're going to realize that you have most of those materials that can accomplish a very similar task right in your own home. For us, we do a lot of Christmas gifts with educational type toys, educational games, kits. My 5 younger boys love kits. They love science kits and social studies kits. They love, they like to get, they have this one kit of snap circuits that they love to pull that out as one of their centers when we're working on science and electricity. So there's lots of ideas that you can get these materials or recreate them. And for us, working on centers with 5 boys, especially now while everyone's at home during this time, and I'm teaching online classes all day on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that's a different schedule for my boys. And usually they're with their homeschool group during that time. So we relied a lot more on centers and independent study for them to continue their learning. And they will set up their centers. We will have 2 to 3 centers set up while I teach a class for an hour and a half. And they know what they need to accomplish with those centers. It's age appropriate, it's skill level appropriate, and it's still challenging for them. And so some ideas that we've had for centers, and here's one where I would really encourage you not to put your children, not to confine them to one type of center or what you think they would like, because they may surprise you. And maybe a center you've put together thinking my child's not doesn't have one of those crazy puzzle brains like some kids do. I have some kids that are puzzlers and some that aren't. But maybe that child's going to surprise you when you get the right type of puzzle, the right type of building project, the right type of science kit, the right type of math problems for them to be doing. And so one thing my boys got for Christmas this past year were sewing kits. And you would think 5 middle school boys would not be excited about sewing kits, but they're kits, they're in a box, they have all the materials there. There were initial instructions on all the different little things they could sew. And once they got through all of those instructions, they surprised me and started sewing their own things and started sewing things for other people and they've even started sewing masks, which I did not ask them to do. I did not instruct them, and they had no instructions on how to do that. But because they built those skills and kept working with this center and pulling it out during center time, they developed those skills. So we have lots of very specific centers like that where you're sewing something and learning those skills. Another center that we have that you'll see in one of these pictures here, we have a box of cards. And they're like flashcards, they're information cards. They have science and social studies. And my boys will pull out, the task may be to pull out 4 cards of 4 different animals and read the card, look at the picture. And then we almost always with all of our centers, we have paper and pencils and drawing materials. My boys are very hands-on. They really learn very well by having the lesson reinforced with a hands-on activity. And for them, their thing is to draw things, and they love to draw and to color. So then their task may be to draw each of those 4 animals. And then they would write what they remember from those cards. So they're sort of recreating the card. But then we would take it a step further and ask them, their task may be, would those 4 animals live in the same environment? What would it look like if we put all of those 4 animals? Would a bunny and a tiger and a bear and a zebra all live in the same environment, in the same neighborhood? And so they have to think that through and pick out the ones that would live together and draw that. And at the end of center time, typically we have a little time where they explain to me what they did, why they did it, and I can redirect them that maybe the tiger and the bunny wouldn't be living in the same exact place or be sleeping in the same habitat. Maybe one's a predator. So those are things that they really enjoy doing their centers and then talking to me about it after. What did they learn? What did they accomplish? What did they create? Some of our centers are very, as Helen was talking about, open-ended. They don't necessarily have a specific task other than here is a box of dominoes, and today we're going to work on making a pattern with them. So with dominoes, my boys love to line them up and make elaborate little mazes and then push them over and see what happens if you put some on books or ramps. Also with those dominoes, they can do math. They can do patterns. So each day may be something different they're going to do with those dominoes. We have a lot of pattern puzzles. where they can make different patterns, see how things go together. Again, my boys love working with magnets, and there's lots of different ways you can work with magnets. You can have very scientific projects you're working with and things you're figuring out. Or they love magnet tiles, and they love to build with magnet tiles. So maybe the task that day will be build with your magnet tiles. I want you to build a parking garage, or I want you to build a cathedral, or you only get square tiles today. What can you do with only square tiles? So we do with my boys a lot of little engineering type centers. We also do a lot of, most centers will have a book with them. So they may read a book about the Revolutionary War, and they would get to see what people were wearing, what they were eating, and they'll have a book. And then maybe they're going to write their own story about it. And my boys love to write stories. So there's this is a big variety of centers that will keep them busy for long periods of time, maybe because you have to get some work done, or you have to make that phone call, or you're making dinner, and they know now it's center time, and that I'm expected to do this project, to do these math games, to do these puzzles, to work with the magnets for a certain amount of time. And at the end of it, then I can talk to mommy about what I was doing. So they know that they have to do that on their own. And it really does build a lot of independent skills. And you'll see that how the centers will evolve. You may start them very simple, but as Helen explained, adding more onto them, adding a higher level skill changes the whole purpose of that center for your children. So look at these centers as a really beneficial way for you to build new skills, to reinforce the lessons that you've been studying in your textbooks and in your workbooks, and a way for your children to show off to you what they've been learning, what skills they've learned, what they remember. For us, those sewing kits became a current events project that I didn't even realize they'd been absorbing all of these news stories about people making masks, and they found the materials on their own or had them in their box and put it together.
As you can see from this slide over here, one thing to think about is not to have a task-specific center too often. So when you're thinking about the week, generally if you're a homeschooler, we say this so many times, but like virtually every homeschooler, one day a week at least you're out at your homeschool group. So if you think of a center lasting 3 or 4 days, that's probably about right. A center becomes boring if you don't keep replenishing it. There's some things that you might go back to again and again, but just don't just throw the same thing out at your child over and over again, or it's going to lose its joy. So you can see here that I have my daughter doing little bitty beads, and this is a thing I think that you've seen them too, that after you put them together, you melt them and it becomes a Christmas ornament. But the thing about that is that I knew that she's learning to write, and so this thing where she has to use the small fingers, this skill I'm looking for isn't that, oh, what's the sound of this letter? I'm just trying to help her have, better hand-eye coordination. So sometimes the skill you're looking for is just building for another skill, right? Renee mentioned things that you create to talk about later. And so this is exactly what we're talking about with this picture of my son and the cash register with fake money. So another open-ended center that my younger children loved to do was to set up a store. So this would be a real treat. Maybe this would be on Friday because they've done the other centers the rest of the day. And what Build a Store would be is that they would go, I would have, fresh cookies for them, or, store, but whatever you have, that they would set up, and they would write a little bit about each item that they were selling. You can see in this picture, he's also selling milk. So he's got milk, they've got cookies. I don't even remember what else, but they would set this whole store up with prices written down, a description of what was fabulous about each item. And then when there's like a break time and their older siblings are done, or it could be the neighbor kids, or it could be your husband, whoever it is going to come and buy these items from them, then of course they're working with math, because each item, has some price that they're going to then do the math themselves. This is a center that might happen over and over again. So it was worth it to buy the little cash register and the money box, because I know I'm going to keep doing that, but I'm not going to do it every day. I'm going to do it, once a month or twice a month, as long as it, stays something that's really thrilling for them and brings them joy. It's really tempting to think that centers can just be done anywhere. And I kind of touched on this before, but depending on the age of your child is really going to depend how you want this to look, okay? So you can see here that I have a younger child doing a center where she's got that whole table spread out. So I'm at the same time with the older children where I can kind of keep her in my sight, but she's not next to those older children, poking them or making too loud of sounds or whatever. She's she's over in her area that's a little bit separate. If you have children that are older, or they're on the same wavelength, it is possible to even have centers that have two people working together, or they're working at a table, but you want to kind of think that through. So here's another center when my girls are a little older, where they're working together on a project that they're actually sitting there and going through it. And again, you're looking for joy. And so part of it is thinking, how is this going to work? And setting this up before it actually happens is really key, because again, you're trying to work undisturbed at this time, and you want them to learn independent skills. So it's important to say, when you get to your centers, this is where this is going to happen, and this is where this is going to happen, so that you don't have that additional sort of conflict happening. So some centers are just going to stay set up all the time. In my family, we did chess, and more chess. Everybody played chess a lot. So we had chess set up. We still play chess a lot. So we had chess set up, and chess was a center. And of course, obviously, chess is a center that lasts, throughout your life. It keeps giving. So the chess is set up here, not because they're doing it at that time, but that's a choice for kids. And even at that age, they would already know how to play chess. But because it would have been taught in centers in smaller pieces, like maybe first they just learned the rook game. But you can see to the left the center that was always up at my house too. And this is the center that's free once too. And that's, I would have my children come with me to the library, and everybody had their own old wheeled library book bag. And we would go to the library, and they got to pick out their center books for the month. And they had certain categories, like, okay, we're learning about physics of flight, so you should find some books on flight. We're also learning about this period of history, so you can pick some books you want on that, and so on and so on. But then they would each get their own display area. So you can see that what they're doing is they're reading books. Well, they're set up on a table, and that's a center. One of the centers was free reading, but rather than just going to pick, and wouldn't be terrible if it was just go pick whatever you want. This reading is more specific in that it's working in with their curriculum, but that can just stay set up. I mean, the books are going to change, but that center is going to stay the same. And of course, I should have mentioned this earlier, but libraries are also a great place to get centers. It just depends on where you live, but two of the places that I've lived, it's probably obvious from these pictures that we moved around a little bit, but some libraries have puzzles, they have games, they have all kinds of extra things besides books that you might be able to take use of. All right, so another kind of center that's almost free, you just have to get paper, are centers that are going to go on your wall, or vertical centers. And sometimes underneath you could have a bulletin board that's constantly changing, or you can just put them on the wall. I bought a million stickies, which you're a stick on both sides, but they came off and they didn't wreck the wall. But you can see here that what's going to happen is the child's going to have a box, and it might have a few items in it, but basically everything happens on this vertically on the wall. And the thing about this that's great is that it's out there, and kids love it, that, you know, their friends come over, or family comes over, or their parent comes over, or whatever, and it's up there display, or at least my children just all love that. And so this particular center is different types of rocks. And so they start off with the box with different kinds of rocks, and through their you know, research, and there's a book in there and some different examples, they're going to figure out, like, well, what's an igneous rock? And they're going to take an example and they're going to hang it up, but they also have to write about it. So you're pulling it in a lot of different skills for an older child to figure out how the world works, how to research, how to present your findings. So here's some more wall centers. So the circles are measuring time, and you know, you can figure out how you can put math and the calendar together, I'm sure yourself. And another center which was on the physics of flight, and they did the history of flight, and they really, my older boys were really interested in this. So they did a lot of centers about this, where you pick a specific angle that they wanted to research more. They would draw the picture, they would read about the books, and then they're going to write about their findings and put them up on the wall. And so these are all whatever you want to call vertical centers, but you can see that they're very inexpensive, because basically you need paper, right? I mean, that's really all you need. Here's one on geography, and there was a geography center, vertical center, and another one on, I want you to read the Declaration of Independence, I want you to read the Constitution, I want you to read the Bill of Rights, and then you need to each write something on how are they different. So sure, you could learn this in a different way too, but having it almost anything, you can put this hands-on spin to keep your day fresh, to keep the situation joyful, and to have things just go in a little different way. These vertical centers work, in my opinion, really well for older children. These are things that you can do, and they stay interesting through junior high, I would say. You know, it keeps being something that they want to do. The next thing I'm going to kind of switch to is some centers that you purchase are just like a homeschooler's dream, because you don't have to do any work. So this is an example of something called widgets. So we did for a really long time. And they actually come with cards, and the card tells you what you should build and what things you're going to need. And there's many, many cards, and they get harder and harder, harder and harder and harder. So you can imagine that this goes on for a long time, and this takes like virtually no work from the parents. So for a long stretch, all you're doing, and you can see on this piece of paper, is I'm just telling my child, do this one and this one today. And then they're going through the week, and then they cross them out as they finish them. So sometimes, even though this particular item, you know, maybe costs a little more than some other things, you can get really a lot of use out of it. And this is a really great thing for when you just want to have some really easy centers that you don't have to put a ton of effort into. I talked about this earlier, so I won't spend a long time on it, but just going back to the idea that a lot of centers can be made out of toys that are really fun. So here's a picture of the Dinosaur Museum, and you can see that they drew some you know, made different graphics and designs and pictures, and then they're just using old chairs and boards to make the sort of aisles that you go around. They're putting different dinosaurs down, and they're using some basic things to make the Dinosaur Museum. We also had the Art Museum. We also had American Girl Doll Museum of time through the ages. I think probably if you think the topic, we had the museum. I've lost track of how many museums that we had, but they were always very fun. And again, we have, it's the stuff that you had. We didn't go out and buy 90 dinosaurs. It was just whatever they had or whatever they wanted to make out of clay. The other thing that I mentioned before, I'm just going to say it again, because especially if you're home right now, this is a really easy center, and yet it's a center that just keeps on giving with higher level thinking. Putting all your toys out and acting out with the creations, the story, and of course, even if your child doesn't really like to draw, you can take pictures of the action that the toys did, and you can write your own story. Or, some of my children love to draw. You could do that too, but it's a little bit different for kids who really don't like to draw very much. And these wonderful 3 sons of mine did not like to draw, but we could still take advantage of centers with this idea that they could take multitude of pictures of what they're playing, and they could write their own creative story, or they could write their own drama. And going back to the idea that you can find stuff for free, we even did centers with rocks. So we would take rocks and do that idea of the remainder group, or put things in order. We used acorns to count up to 500. You really can make centers with what you already have around.
We have the cash register as well. That was a Christmas gift. 7 children later, that cash register is still going strong. So there's an example of something, maybe it cost $20 or $30 because it was a really sturdy one, and it had some math problems with it, but it's lasted for 10, 15 years with 7 kids going through it. And like you, we only bring it out at certain times for certain centers, but they love it. I loved your idea about the wall centers, the vertical centers. That is such a great space saver. And kids love to have what they've been working on in school out there to see. And when they're not working on it, they may be thinking about, what am I going to do with that next time? What do I want to add? What have I learned since then that I can't wait to do on my wall center? And now that I've been doing these online distance learning since we've had our stay-at-home order, I've had an opportunity to see what other people are doing in their actual homes. And I've seen, you made me think when you were talking, I've seen students with these wall centers set up, and they set their computer up with their wall center behind them. So I can see it. And I'm not sure if that's the only space they had to do their class that day, or if that child specifically wanted their computer set up there so Mrs. Capuano could see what they've been working on. But I always make sure to make a comment on what they have on that project behind them. So I love that idea of wall centers. For our centers, a lot of times we didn't use the trays as much, but we used boxes. And so we had these canvas boxes that fit on the shelves, and I would replenish the centers and change the centers each week so that they would know they could go get a certain box that I wanted them to, because I wanted them to work on that particular center. And I love the idea of having the chess table set up, the chess game set up. We've had that too, where we always have a chess game set up. But I love the idea of having games as a center with 5 children, also close in age, but also having the older children who can sort of mentor the younger children in learning those games and playing those games. And games can cover so many different topics in your homeschool. You can have science games, math games. We have a lot of games that reinforce math skills. Your children are learning logic and strategy, and their strategy evolves as they learn how to play these games. So we have certain games that we save for centers only that aren't just family games, but those are center games where 2 or 4 of them can play at once. Or sometimes it's an independent game where you're sort of playing against yourself. So I really like all of the skills that they can learn, which may not be apparent when you're thinking of a game, that is something that's really developing their brain and their thought process. And I loved your idea about the creative play with the toys. those are things you already have in your house, and your children looking at those in new ways. I've got these boys who just love rocks. And when you said acorns, I was thinking whenever we're out, they collect pockets and pockets and bags and baskets full of acorns. So getting them to look at those as tools to their learning, counting and sorting at those younger ages is a fantastic activity for them to develop those skills, to work on their math skills and their with the quantities and the sorting. So those are materials if you have them around, or you've taken a walk to the park, and your children like to collect those things, they like to collect leaves or other things outside, turn those into something more than just collecting. Use that passion they have for rocks or acorns or leaves, and turn it into something that's a little more advanced, and get them to think about those things in a new way. You really had some fantastic ideas there that we've used in our home and that I've seen other people using in their homeschools.
Thanks, Renee. So you always have such great ideas too. And whoever you are out there watching this, I'm sure that you have your own set of marvelous ideas. But this is just to give you some ideas of some jumping off points. And I have one last thing to talk about, and that is that centers can also help you sort of figure out what your child's strengths are, or what they want to work on a little bit more, and you can work with that. So my sons, who did draw and they did like to draw, but maybe that wasn't their favorite thing, there's still other kinds of art that I found were really engaging for them. And so it could be that they were going to make a sculpture, or they were going to carve soap, or as a thing, or that they were going to collect all different leaves and make a book about leaves or pollination or whatever. The thing is that you can really think about tailoring these to a need or a love of your child, so that your child can dig deeper into a topic that they are fascinated in, or even something that you have a skill that you want them to work on a little bit more. It might seem like, as you're watching this, that you're thinking to yourself, I just don't want to take the effort. This just seems like it's going to make my life harder. But the reason that homeschoolers are crazy about stations and centers and have been doing them for decades now is this idea that you will reap the rewards hugely of centers. So you just can really change the dynamics of your day if part of your children are happily engaged in centers, and you've got this time to have all your fresh abilities and interest on these other children. That's a really big thing to have happen. Or if you only have children that are all at the same level, maybe you're going to take a break. But the little bit of time it takes to set up centers and to train your children to use them really also pays huge educational rewards in hands-on experiences, in the amount of opportunity for thinking independently, and for learning those skills of how do these things go together. Like, how can I take this particular box or this particular group of things and make them happen? It's just really worth the time. I know that sometimes it might seem like, well, there's a lot of great educational videos out there. And of course there are. And it might seem like, well, there's a lot of wonderful computer programs. And of course there are. I mean, there's things that I used as sort of centers for my kids that were computer things. We did Mavis Beacon typing for, I don't know, well over a decade. It's a thing where you learn your keyboarding skills. A little bit a day goes a long way. Or editor-in-chief, where they would get on the computer and it's a page and there's problems with it, the punctuation, and you fix it and it comes on. But that is a different kind of learning. And so it's great, it's fabulous to do that. But if you can think about adding this hands-on component, this more sort of organic experience of feeling things and putting things together on your own, it's really a different thing. than just screen time. So we're all going to have to pick what works for us. You may just really hate this idea, but if you possibly can make yourself try it for a month, I think you will be really glad you did. And one last thing to just kind of think about. When I was going, of course, my children are all in college or launched in their life. And so when I called them to talk about, what was your favorite thing about homeschooling? What are some things that you remember? I was really pretty fascinated that 8 out of 9 of them, if I asked them, what are some of your top 5 homeschooling memories? Some of them were centers. And that is a great thing, right? That when your education is done, you can look back on this piece that was really joyful. And since that's what we're trying to help you all have is a joyful experience, we really wanted to hit centers or stations, whatever you want to call them, very hard. Renee, did you have a last word?
Yeah, Helen, I really like that you really hit all of these key points, that centers don't have to be elaborate. They don't have to be expensive, although you may want some of them to be. And they're not there. They're there to reinforce what you're doing. So if you've watched that video on oceanography, this fantastic video, then you can set a center up around that. So it doesn't have to be the video only or the screen time only. Use your centers to reinforce. And when you talked about, it may seem like a bit of work to put into it. That's true. You need to put in a little bit of work for some of these at the beginning, but you're homeschooling at home. Everyone is living at home. Things are going on. It's good to have students, children who can independently learn, who can work on their own and don't need you to sit next to them every minute explaining to them. When you're looking down the road, when they're going to high school and then off to college, those are valuable skills, valuable learning techniques for them to have that they can work on their own. So right now it may seem it's a little bit of work, and maybe you can get dinner made while they have center time, or maybe the plumber's coming that day, and so that's when you set up your center time because they'll be working, but it keeps paying off over and over down the road. When you have these independent thinkers, these independent doers, they have strong reading comprehension skills because they could read the directions, they could read the book and then draw the picture and then tell the story. And it also gives you a very tangible way to measure what they've been learning. And for those students who maybe aren't as verbal or their writing skills aren't as strong, when you see that they can complete those problems with the magnets, then that unit you did on magnets was successful. You know what's getting through or what they may need more work on when you're watching what they're doing in the centers and they're explaining how they've applied their knowledge to that center. It's a good tool for you to see what's coming back. And so it just keeps paying over and over, and it really does bring a lot of joy. It takes the learning out of just that textbook or that video, and it shows them that those lessons are real and that they can apply the math and the science and the art, and they can often apply them over multiple disciplines together. And it does bring them a lot of joy. They don't look at center time as, this is the time mommy isn't going to spend with me. They look at it as, I get to do this activity and mom is so excited. My coach, my mom is so excited that I learned how to do this and I can't wait to show her.
These are great points. Thank you, Renee. We'll see you soon for our next topic.